Good afternoon again. After two intense weeks here in headquarters, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is concluding its 16th session tomorrow with the adoption of a report that includes the recommendations for Member States, UN bodies and Indigenous people. The Rapporteur's unedited version of the report will be available on the UN website after it is adopted, and the final report will be presented to the ECOSOC, to the Economic and Social Council, on July 2017, so in a couple of months from now. We have all enjoyed 2 weeks full of people from diverse countries around the world. More than 1,000 indigenous people's representatives attended the session. The discussions covered the main theme of the 10th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as other pertinent topics for indigenous peoples, including their participation in the United Nations, the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and issues affecting indigenous human rights defenders around the world. Today we are pleased to have here with us three speakers that are going to brief us on the outcomes of the sessions and also give us some tips of the path ahead in the indigenous issue that the Permanent Forum is dealing for the past 16 years. So we have Brian Keane, an expert member of the UN Permanent Forum and the rapporteur for the 16th session. He has been working with indigenous communities around the world for nearly 3 decades. He is co-founder of the international organization Land is Life, and is currently serving as advisor for indigenous peoples' issues for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. We are also very proud to have Mai Tin Yu Mon, a Chin woman working with the Chin Human Rights Organization on indigenous peoples' rights in Myanmar. She's also engaged in promoting the rights of indigenous peoples globally, in particular indigenous youth. She serves as an executive committee member of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. And last but not least, we have Les Malezer, also a member of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. He served as the co-chair of the Australian National Congress and has extensive experience advocating for indigenous people's rights at the national and international level. In 2014, he was appointed as an advisor by the President of the General Assembly in conducting consultations on the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous People. So with these three speakers, I am going to give the floor to them so they can brief us, and if we have some questions from the audience, we will have to take them later. Maybe you, as the rapporteur, you want to start, as you are probably the best position to give us a general overview.
Thank you. So tomorrow wraps up this session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We've had a productive 2 weeks. As was mentioned, we've looked at the 10-year anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and progress in its implementation. Follow-up to the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. We've looked at the 6 thematic areas that the Permanent Forum is mandated to address. And we've had the special theme of human rights defenders. We had a interactive dialogue with the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples on this very important subject. We've seen in recent years killing of indigenous human rights defenders has increased pretty dramatically. We had closed sessions, dialogues with Indigenous peoples, with UN agencies and programs and funds, and with states. All of those, I believe, were pretty productive. And one thing that I think is important to mention, seeing that negotiations start tomorrow on the zero draft, is that we urge states to consider these options presented in the zero draft very carefully. I think the work of the advisors to the President of the General Assembly have done a very good job in preparing this draft. It's a very good start to lead into negotiations. Enhanced participation of Indigenous peoples' representative organizations is a issue that was highlighted by Indigenous peoples as being one of the most important issues to follow up on at the World Conference of Indigenous Peoples. And although we haven't had the opportunity to come up with a common position yet within the forum, because we've been busy all week working, attending the sessions and then working on the report. Personally, and I think many of the forum members believe that in operational paragraph 6, the alternative 1 that is presented seems to be the best alternative, which invites Indigenous peoples to participate in the UN General Assembly and its main committees in issues that impact them, as well as in the Human Rights Council. So tomorrow we'll come out with our report. We've had a lot of reports from Indigenous peoples of incidents of violence related to large development projects going on in their territories. So there's still a lot of work to do. We've heard reports also from states having made progress on establishing consultation mechanisms, working towards establishing national action plans as they committed to at the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. But there's still a lot of work to do. And we're also looking at ways to make the permanent forum more effective. This is, we've got 15 years of recommendations now. Tomorrow we will have 16 years worth of recommendations, and we need to explore ways that we can make follow-up on these recommendations more effective. We do see follow-up. They do have an impact, but I think we can do better. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. Les, maybe you want to continue?
Yes, thank you very much. It's been an interesting session, and certainly we benefit from a lot of Indigenous peoples from all parts of the world coming to bring their issues to us. I think it's unfortunate that we still hear so many complaints, concerns being expressed by Indigenous peoples that their rights are not being respected, that often actions are taken against their interests without their free, prior informed consent. Being the 10th anniversary since the Declaration was adopted, and also because in 2014 the General Assembly adopted an action document, the outcome document from the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, we have a higher expectation that the rights of Indigenous peoples are being respected and implemented around the world. And in that situation, I think that we are disappointed that not enough states are looking to enact the rights of Indigenous peoples into their policies, into their laws, and that there's been a continuation of the situation, the culture and the policies that existed before the Declaration has adopted. So we are encouraged by some particular states. We're trying not to name individual states, but some particular states have shown us some very good examples of what they have done, particularly in the last 12 months, and they are leading by example, but not enough states are taking the floor to present their efforts to implement the rights. Often we're hearing from states their report on how much they're willing to support the education, the health, etc. for Indigenous populations in their country, but there's not a great desire to talk about recognition of the right of self-determination as peoples, and for the state to form a collaboration, to form a partnership with Indigenous peoples and their representatives and their leadership in order to address what Indigenous people see as being the priorities for their future development. It's been an interesting session because we have tried to use procedures that will give us more information about what's happening at the local level. We've also engaged with the other important mechanisms in the United Nations. First off, the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples, which is under the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and the Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples, to see if amongst our mechanisms we can get better coordination and increase the procedures to implement the declaration. We also have had good discussions with United Nations agencies, subsidiaries and bodies, that there's a wide acceptance and agenda now amongst those agencies to also promote the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And again, we have some big agencies, those that are in contact with Indigenous peoples, those that are engaged at country levels, are giving us information of some great projects and programs that they're running in that regard. Also, it's been interesting to hear of other agencies, lesser known agencies, who can play an important role in terms of advancing the rights or, in fact, assisting states and Indigenous peoples to come together to see that the outcome document, the actions in the outcome document, are being implemented. So it's a positive message that we're getting where the changes are occurring, but it's also a disappointment to hear that there's not enough changes, not enough widespread support being given to the declaration. And our membership, our Permanent Forum membership, and I think we're the 6th term now of membership on the Permanent Forum in our 16th session, are very, very keen to elevate our efforts to promote and protect the rights of Indigenous peoples around the world. So we're looking for the most effective ways in which we can function, including a challenge for us at the moment is our capacity to be able to remain engaged and to see that developments occur in between our sessions, that it's 12 months between our sessions, and we want to be have more impact on the situations around the world in between that. We have sent out a message already to states that we would like to have donations to help facilitate the work of the Permanent Forum, and as we get more organised, we'll be able to put out, I think, some stronger messages that the better the Permanent Forum is established with its capacity to operate, then the more that can be achieved in implementing the declaration. I think you'd like to hand to the next speaker now.
Thank you very much. Mai, please.
Thank you very much. For me, as a youth participant to this Permanent Forum, this session, it was really, I feel really empowered at this session because let's start from the theme of this year, empowering Indigenous women and empowering Indigenous youths. So this is really kind of a milestone for us youths. And I feel we youths feel truly recognized the positive contributions we can make in order to achieve the rights to get enjoy the rights in the UN trip. And also we had quite many side events with the topics focusing on the youths. So here we discussed a lot, and different agencies they came and listened, and even the permanent missions from different states they came and listened. And I feel like people are really they are trying to show that they are ready to listen to us, and then also to accept the roles, the positive contributions the youths can make. So actually, before attending the session, we, as a Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, we had a really big kind of targets or mission objectives when we that we'd like to achieve when we come to the forum, and this is also to maximize the impact that we can carry back home. So we had a preparatory meeting for this permanent forum in Rome 2 weeks before the forum. We met with the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and then we also had a discussion on how we can start engaging formally to be able to work effectively with FAO and with indigenous youths from across the globe. So representatives, focal points from 7 socioeconomic regions we attended. So here what I'd like to highlight is that also when we came here, we met with the interagency support group and other different agencies, and we are trying to give recommendations on a platform through which youths can contribute more to the realization of the objectives that we have. So in overall, as a youth, I feel really positive to this session. Yet, with states still lacking the recognition for the rights of indigenous peoples, and this and all the issues and all the discussions throughout the session reflect a lot that we still need to work a lot, and I also feel like more responsibility, more duty that we can share. So also following the outcomes from here, that many things are happening at the national and regional levels to follow up with this outcome, especially the outcome document from World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. And for me, myself, I'm participating in organizing this national policy dialogue. So we can see in some countries the starting point of the real implementation of this dialogue between the governments, states, and then indigenous people. So we really have good starting points, but we still do need to work much harder. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. From the Department of Public Information, we are now, together with the High Commissioner for Human Rights, preparing for the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is in 2018. I'm sure the Permanent Forum will be consulted in this big communications effort to get the indigenous angle included in that global communications campaign. I think, as I said, this is being webcast. Sometimes we'll receive written questions if this is the case, we will send them to you. But we do not have here more people, so I guess unless you want to add something else for the record, that will be registered in UN webcast. If there is nothing else, we really want to congratulate you for the the work in the past 2 weeks. For us in DPI, it's always a real honor to support, from a communications point of view, the Permanent Forum. Martina, Don Lon, and the team. So we have one journalist coming. I don't know if you have any question on the outcomes on the Permanent Forum.
I do, actually. Thanks a lot.
May I make a statement before?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just would like to pick up that there's a very important processes going through. We've mentioned some of those in the United Nations, but perhaps the focus for this year is this recommendation that Indigenous peoples have representation to the highest levels of the UN, that as peoples with the right of self-determination, we are not confident that our interests are represented by states alone, and that Indigenous peoples often have their own forms of governance institutions and decision-making institutions, and yet we still find that important decisions, including the adoption of the Declaration, are being taken at these levels in the General Assembly without Indigenous people's voice being involved and participating in there. And there's every argument as to why that should occur. It's meant to be beneficial, it's meant to be inclusive, and Indigenous people should be able to participate in the General Assembly, and certainly at least observe when issues of Indigenous peoples are being discussed. And these are very, very important issues. It's not just everyday things. These are things like lands, territories and resources. The resources on Indigenous peoples' territories are important to the rest of the world. The lands and territories of Indigenous peoples are fundamental to the current climate change issues, that the most pristine environments are those belonging to Indigenous peoples. There's issues like cultural diversity, the languages and culture and so on is 80% to 90% held by Indigenous peoples around the world, Indigenous populations. So it's not as though Indigenous peoples are looking to go above their status and so on in terms of being able to participate in the process of global governance. It's just that the right place for Indigenous peoples is still yet to be determined. The Declaration was an acknowledgement that we are peoples of right to self-determination. It's then a case of how to translate that into a situation that works in terms of no person being left behind means Indigenous peoples must be heard on matters that affect their own rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Please.
Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. Thanks a lot for the briefing. I was listening it from the focus booth that I work out of now. But it was exactly on that topic of sort of, if you could give a little more specifics about how you envision participation in the General Assembly, in the Human Rights Council, and I'm also wondering whether these other agencies, like, I'm thinking of the IMF. I mean, there's a number of international organizations that impact on these issues, and so are you proposing kind of formal observer status, or just a little bit more on that? And I'd asked a couple of the other panels that came during the forum, has the Secretary General, the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has he interacted with the forum during the time that you've been here? And if not, why not? And finally, on Myanmar, we talk a lot about the Rohingya, which is a big issue there. But can you say, is that a kind of an anomaly? Are things otherwise going well in the country? If you just your own views of sort of how the government is dealing with issues, including the Rohingya, if you're willing to speak on it. Thanks.
Who wants to take the question? You will? Okay.
Perhaps if I start with your first set of questions about participation and what form does it take. I think observer status at the General Assembly is the relevant form of accreditation that has been applied to organisations. The situation that we found is most relevant to us is when resolutions are being prepared that are either directly or indirectly of importance to Indigenous peoples, that we are excluded from the stages of negotiation on those resolutions. We've been fortunate that we have been involved in a very positive way by member states to a certain point, but then the doors close and then there will be continued negotiations with states only. And that often, I think, involves a negative impact. It's to the detriment of Indigenous peoples in that changes occur that states were not going to introduce while Indigenous peoples were present, and that's a bit of a problem. So it's certainly at the General Assembly there are these occasions that at least once a year there's the resolutions on Indigenous peoples, but I mentioned other matters involving climate change, development in lands, territories, the issue of territorial integrity, etc. Issues of racism are discussed. So there's so many things. Even this year we've got discussions going on about oceans and so on, where Indigenous peoples are very largely affected by these matters and can contribute positively to the outcome in those things. Similarly, with the Human Rights Council and even ECOSOC, we are able to attend meetings. If we've got NGO accreditation, we can speak. But we are down the list in the sense that the floor goes to the states, it goes to the UN agencies, it might go to other levels, and then it goes to the NGOs, and we have to take our place amongst the NGOs. When in fact, when you have large populations being represented by legitimate governments of Indigenous peoples and so on, have a right to be heard around the same time as states. I had this experience myself in Australia with the UPR examination, Universal Periodic Reviews, these 5-year peer reviews that are meant to look at the overall performance of a state on human rights. I participated very strongly in the lobby groups to present reports, and I sat and listened. I couldn't speak or take the floor when Australia was being examined. And then when the report had came back and the Human Rights Council opened up the floor for NGOs to respond, because I was number 11 on the list of NGOs, I couldn't speak. So 1/3 of the 150 recommendations were about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia, but no Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representative was able to speak at all under that process. So it gives you just some example of the practicalities that are involved here, that Indigenous peoples do need to be heard, and there are very relevant places where we should be heard. So I might leave it at that and give the other two the opportunity to answer your questions.
Brian, Mai?
I'll just follow up on Les's and talk a little bit about why it's important that Indigenous peoples have this enhanced status. First, because they're not NGOs. But second, when governments come together to address some of the crises that the world is facing today, the environmental crisis, economic crisis, climate change crisis, Indigenous peoples should be at the table. If you look, the proof is in the pudding. You've got over 80% of the world's biodiversity on Indigenous peoples' lands. It seems like almost every week now, new studies are coming out that show that the best way to protect forests is to recognize the territorial rights of Indigenous peoples. Les had mentioned Indigenous peoples are guardians of over 90% of the world's languages. Language is one of the best indicators of the health of ecosystems. So if the Indigenous language in the ecosystem is healthy, there's biodiversity there, and the ecosystem is healthy. They're also guardians to a lot of the world's medicinal knowledge, pharmacological knowledge, agricultural knowledge, and guardians of the vast majority of the diversity of agricultural seeds, genetic resources. So as the world comes together to try to address some of these issues, it's important to have the people that have all of that knowledge there at the table. And when we look at the issue of global climate change, reducing emissions is one big part of the solution, but also maintaining the integrity of these large landscapes that maintain the climatic stability of the planet is also just as important an issue. And the only place where we find intact large landscapes is where Indigenous peoples have somehow managed to maintain control of their territories. So for Indigenous peoples, sustainable development is not something that they're looking for or a new concept. That's something that they've been doing for thousands of years. And as the world's governments sort of grope their way towards figuring out what sustainable development means, I think Indigenous peoples have a lot to teach them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. You want to add something, Mike? Yes, please.
Because I heard the question particularly on Myanmar. Yes, when we talk about Myanmar, then what people first see is this Rohingya issues. And when we talk about the issues, human rights issues in Myanmar, the Rohingya issue is one of the issues, really big issues. But then if you go up north, you will see this militarization. And like all of you know, Myanmar is the country with the longest civil war. And hundreds of thousands of our indigenous peoples, Kachin, Karen, Shan, still living in the border of Thailand as refugees. And all these issues relating to land and natural resources and all these development projects that the state is trying to do in indigenous areas. So what I'd like to say is that so many issues, and like I mentioned, we still need to work really hard, and we cannot work. It is even sometimes it's even really difficult to prioritize issues for us, because so many things are happening, thousands of people dying, and of course, everyone deserves this citizenship, and everyone deserves acceptance and yes, their rights. Everyone has deserves to enjoy our own human rights. Yes. Then when it comes to these issues, we actually are trying our best to incorporate, to promote and protect the rights of everyone. But then when it comes to talking with the government, until now, that the government is not even accepting the term indigenous as indigenous, but then at the same time we are being mentioned as ethnic nationalities. But what is important here is the rights. How do we enjoy our rights as indigenous peoples? Not only arguing on the terms, but the rights that is behind our nomination or name. So that's why also the peace, the political negotiation and dialogue is still going on. And for me, myself, as an indigenous person, I do believe in the goodwill talk and dialogue with the government. And that's why when I go back, I'll be facilitating in one of the sessions of the National Political Dialogue back at home. So I would like to conclude that there are still many issues that we need to be working on. And yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mai, and thank to our three speakers, and really a big thank you to the Permanent Forum for keeping the indigenous issues alive in the UN agenda and for your good work. We will be expecting the unedited report tomorrow, and then the final report in July in a couple of months. So thank you very much, and good luck and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.